What's up, everybody, and welcome back to another exciting edition of Enjoying the Review. I'm your host, Incomparable Zach Jones, and I think we got a good one for you today. Today, I'm going to be reviewing and recapping Daredevil Born Again, Episode 3, entitled The Hollow of His Hand. Before I get into it, I want to remind everybody, if you will, please subscribe to the YouTube channel, comment, like, review, all that good stuff. You can also listen in audio form on your podcast catcher choice, and you can follow me on social media on Twitter or Blue Sky at Zach Jones Live. That's ZachJonesLive. All right, guys, let's get into it. So I gotta say, I really liked this episode of Daredevil. If you didn't catch my review of the last of episode 1 and 2, my feelings were basically like, I generally liked it, but there were some things that put me off, the action being one of them. Maybe that's why I like this episode more. Is that this episode had hardly any action, and I thought it was really great. I think I'm going to give this episode a 7.8 out of 10. I thought it was a really strong episode. And I had a couple takeaways that I want to talk about, but I really can't talk about these without spoilers. So, like, right off the bat, I'm just going to dive right into spoilers. So if you haven't watched the episode, please watch it and come back. So one thing that I'm really digging about one of the kind of storylines of this season is something that I'm kind of surprised they're confronting in the way they are. So what I'm talking about is the Punisher angle of it all. So for those of you that don't know, a few years ago, there was a bit of a controversy around the Punisher character because there were people both in law enforcement and just some shady characters that kind of co-opted the Punisher symbol. And so because of that, Marvel, on the publishing side of the comics anyway, I think went about things in the exact wrong way. Is they kind of wanted to avoid that controversy as much as they could. So what they did in the comics is first they changed the Punisher's symbol. Now I think a part of that was so they could like copyright the image, because I think his classic skull look is like so simple that they couldn't or whatever. So that might be part of it. But they also, like, at that time, like, made it so he used swords more than guns. That was like the Jason Aaron run of the comics. And by the way, that comic book is actually pretty good. I'm just saying it did seemingly was purposely designed to kind of go away from the Frank Castle of old and kind of avoid that controversy. And then they also tried to make a new Punisher with a totally different character. And that comic just kind of came and went, and nobody cared. I read it. It wasn't like offensively bad. It was just kind of a bland and forgettable. And like maybe one day somebody will do something with that character that's more interesting. But that particular series was boring. And then, I don't think on the comic book side, I don't think they've used Frank Castle much since that Jason Aaron run ended. So, but as far as this show, first of all, I want to say, so at the end of episode 2, I mentioned that I seen they showed a guy had a tattoo like on his hand, but it went by so fast, and I didn't really freeze it and see. Apparently, that was a small Punisher tattoo, and so we'll see in this episode. There's actually another cop with like a more blatant like Punisher like neck tattoo. And there's also at one point we see some Punisher graffiti. It has the Punisher skull and it says "triggered" on it. And I'm wondering if they'll tie the Muse character in as well. Like maybe that was his graffiti. And he's also got like a sort of like in his own head vigilante bent. But what I thought the comics should have always done was, instead of avoiding the controversy like they did, they should have made a story and went right into it. Have a story where some extremists co-op the Punisher symbol, and then it inevitably leads to Frank Castle having a confrontation with those people and basically saying, hey, You know, I don't represent you, but maybe also Frank then having to take into account that, oh, maybe I got to be more careful. Um, I don't know if the Frank Castle character is nuanced enough to think that, but maybe he would, think about, what the message he wants to put into the world. But Frank's whole thing is that he's punishing the bad guys that the corrupt system won't, right? And these guys that are co-opting his symbol are basically just using it as an excuse to kill people they don't like for various reasons. And we already know from the trailer of Daredevil Born Again that Frank is going to show up, and they announced that he's also going to have like a kind of one-off special, kind of like they did with the Guardians of the Galaxy Christmas special and Werewolf by Night. So he's going to get his own little episode somewhere down the line dedicated to him. But he's also going to be on this Daredevil show. And so it's just, I'm excited to see how that plays out and how they're going to have Frank react to these people, co-opting his symbol. It's interesting, and I'm glad that they seem to kind of be addressing the controversy rather than running from it, which I do feel like they kind of did in the comics. Second thing I wanted to note is, so I mentioned in my last review that the parallels between Wilson Fisk and Donald Trump are kind of inescapable, and they're being, very blatant about it, which I think is honestly okay. They're really, I'm sure this show is going to alienate certain people because it's just undeniably political. It just is. But one thing, another aspect that they seem to be toying around with is, so at the tail end of this episode, we'll see that, well, I should mention, so there was a scene in, I think it was episode 2, where Fisk had an interview with BB Urich. And after she left, he told his guy, he's like, we can use her. And, I was wondering, like, what does that mean? And I think we get a taste of that in this episode. So he has an interview with her, and they don't explicitly say it in this episode anyway. But my feeling is what happens is she puts out her interview with Fisk, and someone who's, on the, a political extremist hears, his speech, and that is what inspires him to, go kill the White Tiger. And so I think this, in a way, is a commentary on how the media, what responsibility do they take in how, like in our world, how they report on the various crazy things that Donald Trump says. Is it okay for them to just, put his comments out with no fact checking or context? Is it okay just to have pundits come on and go, well, I feel his comments were disturbing, and the other guy says, no, I think they were right in line. The both sides is some kind of stuff that so many networks, like CNN, for example, do. Just think about Trump when he does kind of, he's done like the dog whistling calls for violence, like what did he say? Stand by, and whatever he said on that one. But that's the thing. You could also say that, Wilson Fisk in his interview with BB, even though he might not be explicitly telling people to commit violence, a part of him probably knows that can happen. And by the way, he has a interaction with Vanessa where he's basically saying, like, sometimes chaos sowing chaos can be beneficial. And, I think we see that. So just a lot of really intriguing, political things this show is addressing. and I think so far fairly in a fairly smart way. And then the third thing I wanted to mention, you know, let me actually tell you guys a quick story, and this is going to involve a recommendation I'll make that almost no, I'm sure nobody watching this will take me up on, but you should. So a couple of years ago, HBO put out a show, a Perry Mason show, which was like the origins of Perry Mason, and it lasted 2 seasons. Pretty good show. I would recommend that. But because I liked that show, it inspired me to actually go back and try the OG, Raymond Burr Perry Mason show that started in the 1950s and ran into the 1960s. And so when I was a kid, that's a show my grandma would watch. It was a black and white show, and as a kid, I was just like, this is the most boring show of all time. This legal drama. But for those of you who don't know, basically, here's the formula of a typical Perry Mason episode: is uh, somebody will be murdered, and an innocent person will be accused of that murder, and Perry Mason will end up representing them. And then throughout the trial, Perry Mason will suss out who the real murderer is and eventually expose them. So you get a murder mystery and a courtroom drama all in one show. And it's a great show. I highly, highly recommend it. But I think that show kind of reinforced in me just how much narrative juice you can get out of a courtroom scene. And I think that might be one of the like, for many years, I've kind of leaned towards Daredevil being my favorite Marvel character. And I think the courtroom stuff does play into that. And I thought the courtroom scene in this episode was really good. I think I like that, dichotomy of, I mean, that's the whole thing with Daredevil, the Matt Murdock lawyer, Catholic, versus Daredevil and the violence he must commit, and that whole, balance between himself. And I think the courtroom scenes play a big part in that, and really add to the show and the characters. So those are kind of my big takeaways. Again, I thought this episode was pretty fantastic, and it kind of surprises me, that they're taking on political issues as much as they do in this show. With that being said, guys, let's get into the details of this episode, and let's do the recap. So the episode starts with Matt meeting with Hector in a jail. And Hector tells the story of these Puerto Rican frogs, the mate for life, kind of how he misses the sound that they would make. So now we get to the scene where there's these two obviously mobsters in a gang, and they end up being hijacked and ultimately killed by this Irish gang. By the way, I'm sure to an extent there are still, I think organized crime, is a fraction of what it, obviously used to be. I'm sure there are still, some gangs, but, I feel like so many shows have, Irish gangs in modern times in America, and I'm just like, is that a thing? Are there Irish speaking accent, actually from Ireland, the Lucky Charms accent and everything, modern gangs in America? I'm truly curious. If anyone knows the answer to that, let me know. But I find it funny that in so many modern shows, there's always these really Irish gangs. I'm like, okay. So now we go to a scene between Wilson and Vanessa, and they have the whole thing where they're eating on opposite ends of this long dining table. We get it visually, these two are kind of distant. They're She asked him about like, hey, have you seen this painting that you're interested in? And I think she kind of mentions that, hey, I could launder a bunch of money somehow if we buy that. But Wilson says that right now he has higher goals. Then they are interrupted by one of Wilson's campaign managers, the woman, I think her name is Sheila, I want to say. And she tells him about the hijacking that took place. So Wilson tells her, hey, make all the correct calls and make sure that Commissioner Gallo takes priority to find the guilty parties, basically. So the campaign manager leaves, and Vanessa tells Wilson that the other gangs are misbehaving because now there's nobody at the head of the table. Because for the time being, with him as mayor, he's having her step down as well because he can't have any connection, to crime. So she says without one of them there, they're all going to turn on each other. And Wilson says they are rats at the bottom of the barrel and they should just let them kill each other. But she says, okay, we can do that, but whoever's left standing is going to come after you. And Wilson says, these petty blood feuds are no longer their concern. I thought this was a good shot. So once again, it kind of zooms in on Wilson's knuckles, and we see that they're bloody like in the previous episode. And then it immediately transitions to Matt's bloody knuckles from beating up the cops in the last episode, and he's kind of trying to wash him up in the sink. I really, like that transition shot showing that these guys are kind of, similar, in that way. I will say though, like, I like they're kind of like keeping it like why is his knuckles always bloody? And a part of me is wondering, are we going to find out that Adam guy or whatever that Vanessa had an affair with, like he's just like beating him like every episode, something like that. I guarantee when they're eventually going to show what he's doing, and it's going to be something bad like that, So yeah, Matt, he's washing his bloody knuckles, and Officer Powell comes in. He's one of the cops Matt beat up. By the way, Matt beat up him and the other guy so brutally, it almost looked like he killed him. And I know some people actually speculated online, hey, I think he did kill him. I never thought that because I think that would just be a step too far. And also, like Matt mentioning, he stopped being Daredevil because he almost killed Bullseye. Just, didn't quite sit to where I thought they would do that. But Officer Powell confronts Matt in the bathroom, and he's like, hey, the judge would probably throw the case out if I tell him what you did. And Matt basically threatens him directly back, saying, yeah, well, if I told the judge about you trying to tamper with a witness, you probably wouldn't fare so well. So, a little banter there where it threatens him. Okay, so now we get a scene with that Detective Cherry guy, but we also, and I referenced this earlier, we see the Punisher graffiti on a wall, the Punisher skull when it says triggered on it. I do kind of think they're going to connect all the graffiti they've been showing back to the Muse character once they introduce him. But we'll see. So Cherry goes to the safe house where they are stashing the witness, and he gives him some drugs to keep him from sweating and puking on the witness stand. I gotta say, I'm glad that Marvel is, seemingly didn't go the more PG route with Daredevil. They're letting Daredevil be violent. They're allowing things like drugs to exist in this context, and so I'm a little surprised they haven't PG'd it up at least a little bit. But I like this. I like that they're keeping it mature. So Officer Powell takes a stand, and he starts lying about what Hector did. Says that he killed his partner and all that. And Matt can hear Hector's heartbeat uh, racing, and he can sense that he's going to maybe blurt something out. So he tells them not to react, and Hector calms back down. So Matt starts interviewing Powell, and he makes a smart remark about him having the black eye. And Matt accuses Powell of roughing up Nikki Torres, who was the confidential informant that was on the subway platform. And Powell just straight up denies knowing who Torres is. So Matt can hear a cop that's watching the trial. He leans over and tells the guy next to him, "Hey, Torres cannot be allowed to testify." And this is the cop that has the Punisher tattoo on his neck. So I kind of liked this misdirect. Cherry, it looks like he puts the witness in the van. He takes off, and he notices that he's being followed. He gets stopped. This motorcycle cop pulls up in front, and then Officer Powell walks up and tells him to get out of the van. So here we're thinking, oh no, they caught him. They're going to kill the witness. But Cherry opens up the back of the van, and he reveals it was a shell game. The van is empty, and the witness, then it's revealed, was actually taken to the court in a taxi cab. But then here comes the other reversal. Torres gets on the witness stand, but then he lies and says that he was not on the subway platform. Now, I did like that turnaround, although I will say, like, I didn't see like the shell game with the van happening. I probably should have, but then I did kind of see this happening. But one thing is, like, okay, they're in New York City. Are you telling me there would have been no like security footage, either directly in the subway or from like a surrounding like store or something? There would have been no camera that would have caught this Torres guy like in the vicinity where they could use that as a partial defense. That part seems maybe a little far flung, but again, I'm no expert on like CCTV and like that kind of stuff. But it just seems like there wasn't an ATM machine or something that would have caught him walking by. Something, I don't know. Okay. So now we get a scene where Wilson's kind of right hand man, I guess his name is Buck, he meets with the head of the crime families. And he tells Luca that he will have to pay Victor 1.8 million to make things right. So I assume like Luca must be part of the gang with the Irishman, and he's like, hey, you took from them, now you're going to make it right. You're going to pay the money back. But Luca tells Buck that he doesn't take orders from the mayor's errand boy. And he has this line where he tells Luca he does not work for the mayor, he works for the man. I'm not even sure exactly what to make of that line, but okay, fair enough. So now we get a scene in Matt's law office where Cherry, Matt, and Kirsten kind of brainstorm like what their next move should be now that Torres isn't testifying. And Matt decides that the only move left is to put Hector on the witness stand and show the jury what they know about Hector. Now, I don't know much about law stuff, but I do know that like people almost never put the defendant on the witness stand. It's like no matter what, it's almost always like the worst idea like you can do. But I guess they do set it up here as like, oh, it's their very last resort. So I'll allow it, I guess. So now we get a scene between Vanessa and Wilson. They're at the therapist's office, but the therapist hasn't came in the room yet. So Vanessa tells Wilson that she sent Buck, to make Luca pay Victor the compensation money, and Wilson tells her not to make him lose trust in her. Like, he doesn't like that she didn't inform him that she was doing this. And she basically just says, "Hey, I don't want to see everything that we work for, fall apart." And Wilson says, "Hey, I get it. You just want to keep the peace." But he says sometimes chaos must reign in order to build a stronger order. And so again, like, no matter like your political feelings, this is a pretty blatant reference, I think, to Donald Trump. Because whether you like Donald Trump or not, you got to admit he is an agent of chaos. He likes introducing chaos. Vanessa thinks that Wilson is punishing her for her affair with this Adam guy we've never met, and he denies that. So now Heather, Matt's girlfriend, the therapist, she enters the room, and they begin their therapy session. So Matt puts Hector on the stand and has him tell his side of the story of what happened. But then, in a surprise move, Matt reveals to the courtroom that Hector is indeed the vigilante known as the White Tiger. Which honestly, they'll have a scene later, but this was kind of a D move by Matt, not clearing this with him first. So the judge, of course, is upset by this, so he calls him and the other prosecuting lawyer into his office. And, he's like, "You were just in my office giving me all this stuff the other day about how it would be unfair to introduce this. And now you're kind of going back on your word and you're introducing it." And the judge says, "I would declare a mistrial, but at this point, that would be pointless. The cat's out of the bag." So he's like, "We're just going to continue this." We see another like BB report by BB Urich, where she interviews a guy that basically says he doesn't think Hector will end up getting a fair trial because he's Puerto Rican, and there's prejudice at play in the system. So back in his jail cell, Hector tells Matt that he should have asked first about exposing his secret identity, which I just referenced, and he's right. Matt says, "Yeah, I know that, but we're desperate, and I had to take a big swing." But Matt tells him that if he is acquitted, that his White Tiger days are over. Hector tells him that being White Tiger is more than putting on a suit. It's who he is. He says it's a calling. He didn't choose it. It chose him. But Matt tells him there's other ways to help that don't require a mask, and that he needs to think about his family. Which, again, shows... I like this scene because, Matt's taking his own lessons he learned as Daredevil and applying them here. But then, of course, we know at some point Matt is going to become Daredevil again. I will say, though, I do, and maybe I should save it for the end, but I do think it was very irresponsible of Hector to go back to the White Tiger, especially as soon as he does. And it is kind of an FU to his family, I think, to put himself in such obvious danger. So Matt has a series of witnesses testify that White Tigers saved their lives, and he also has several police reports from police that reported either being saved or helped substantially by the White Tiger. So Matt makes the case that Hector attacking anybody without provocation would be out of his character based on everything the jury has just heard. The prosecution, however, makes the case that, Hector may very well be a good person, but sometimes good people make bad choices and do bad things. And that real heroes like the police do not need to hide behind a mask. I don't know, about that line as much, but I do like that. This guy did make like a compelling argument, and if you were in that jury and heard both arguments, like, you would have to think about it. So Matt, before the courtroom fills up and final verdict comes in, he sits in there by himself, and he keeps feeling the Daredevil horn that Karen gave him. So he's definitely, it seems contemplating, I don't know if he's contemplating at this point being Daredevil again, but it's definitely, you can tell he's wrestling with it. The fact that he hasn't been Daredevil in a while. So surprisingly enough, and I didn't think it was going to go this way. The jury finds Hector not guilty on all charges. So Wilson sees a newscast of Hector's verdict, and he tells his campaign staff that he wants to see BB Urich again. We get a scene where Matt and Heather have a dinner date at Matt's place, and they celebrate Matt's win. So they continue to build their relationship. Okay, so this is where we get the scene I referenced at the beginning. Wilson tells BB, and she's recording this, that the court's got it wrong, and that Hector's verdict is a miscarriage of justice. And they kind of, edit his words in while Hector once again suits up as White Tiger. Again, even if he wanted to be White Tiger again, doing it this soon, especially now that everybody knows his identity, and he has to know that even if he's not hurt, he'll be instantly arrested because people know who he is, and then he won't be able to take care of his family. So just a horrible idea on his part. But anyway, he puts it on. He goes on patrol. He hears a woman scream. And when he goes to investigate, he ends up being killed, shot right in the head by a guy. And then to close out the episode, the man is revealed to be wearing a Punisher symbol on his chest, So one thing I will say, I hope we don't find out that Wilson Fisk just hired this guy, because then I think it defeats like the political message of the media. Like, I like the idea that Wilson, he put out this kind of very strong dog whistle. BB reported it, and she'll, face the consequences of that. And then, predictably, one of these Punisher worshipping extremists took his message, and they did what they did, and executed the White Tiger. So yeah, I'm interested to see the fallout of this. How will Matt respond? How will BB respond? I think there's a lot of good setup here. And again, I just thought it was real. It was really cool that, the best episode of this show yet had basically very little action in it. Just good writing, good execution. Yeah, I really enjoyed this one, guys, and I'm curious how you guys felt about it. And I am curious how certain politically minded people will feel about this series, because, like I said, they're not being subtle here at all. Like the comparisons of Fisk to Trump are very obvious. The parallels of the Punisher extremists in this show and to the ones in our world are very basically a one-to-one type thing. Um, and again, the commentary on how the media handles things and their responsibility. So a lot of great themes in this episode. I really really dug it. But guys, I think that'll do it for today's show. If you will, please subscribe to the show, like, comment, all that good stuff, review, positive reviews. As I mentioned before, you can also listen in audio form on your podcast catcher of choice. And you can follow me on social media on Twitter or Blue Sky at Zach Jones Live, ZachJonesLive. But guys, until next time, I hope you're enjoying the review. Bye, guys.